Herbivore, omnivore, carnivore? That is the question. That is just one of the many questions we will be asking and answering today as we look at the skulls of the mammals found here in New York State and Black Rock Forest. Skulls can tell us a lot about how an animal used to live. We can look at lots of different structures in the skull to figure out some basic things about the lifestyle of that animal. For example, what structure might you look at if you wanted to know what an animal ate? If you said teeth, you're right on. So we're going to go through some skulls and look at different features to help us determine maybe what an animal ate, what its predominant sense might have been, whether it was a predator or a prey, and also look at maybe some other interesting features about that skull. Before we start looking at mammal skulls, first we need to figure out, what is a mammal? What are some of the unique characteristics that we find only in mammals? Let's think back to elementary school. So some of the things we learned in elementary school, some of the very basic characteristics of mammals, are that they have hair, like us humans do. They produce milk through mammary glands, and they have live birth. However, not all mammals have live birth. We have these crazy weird animals called monotremes, like the platypi and the echidnas, that actually lay eggs. Some of the lesser known uniquely mammalian characteristics that relate to the skulls we'll be looking at today are a singular jawbone and 3 middle ear bones. Now the equivalent of the middle ear bones are found inside the jaw of reptiles, birds, and amphibians. However, in mammals, they've migrated into the middle ear and changed their function to help facilitate hearing. And the last uniquely mammalian characteristic that we'll be looking at today is, I'm going to throw a big science word out at you here now, is heterodont dentition. Now let's think about what that word means. If we think back to our Latin and Greek roots, we should be able to figure it out. Hetero means different. Dont means teeth. So you put those together and you get different teeth. So heterodont dentition just means that mammalians have different types of teeth in their mouth. Other animals, all of their teeth are exactly the same. Think of a shark tooth. If you've ever seen a shark tooth, every single shark tooth looks exactly the same. Now, let's take a look at our first skull, right here. And we'll start by looking at the teeth. Are any teeth bigger than the others, more prominent in the mouth? What do you think these teeth might be used for? These big teeth here are called incisors, and incisors are used to nip and tear away food into the mouth. Look at their color. Do you think there's a different function for these teeth? Now, this orange color doesn't mean that he hasn't been to the dentist in a while and needs a good cleaning. No. The function is this enamel is very, very hard, whereas the white in the back, the dentin, is very soft. So when the teeth rub up against each other during chewing, they create this chisel shape. Another animal has a different solution to keeping that chisel shape. This here is a rabbit skull. Now, instead of having a hard enamel on the outside and a soft dentin, they actually have a second pair of teeth behind their incisors. These teeth function in much the same way to maintain this chisel shape for lots and lots of chewing. Now, let's go back to our first skull and look at the teeth in the back of the mouth, the molars or cheek teeth. Let's take a look at them more closely. Notice they have lots of ridges. They're not just flat. There are ridges and valleys, which give a large surface area for grinding food. So we can tell by looking at both of these teeth, both the front and back, that this animal does a lot of chewing. Now, we can also look at the placement of the eyes on the skull in order to determine whether this is an animal that hunts down its prey as a predator or whether or not it was hunted itself as a prey. Now, when you're a predator, you need to have a good sense of depth perception in order to leap onto your prey. This is achieved through something called binocular vision. And this is when the sensory input from both of your eyes overlaps, which is what gives you your sense of depth perception. Now, the closer your eyes are together and the more forward facing, the more area you have of this overlap and gives you a better sense of depth perception. However, this also narrows your field of view. Prey species, on the other hand, which are usually plant-eating herbivores, don't need to chase down their dinner of plants. Therefore, they need less binocular vision and a wider field of view in order to see their predators. Therefore, their eyes are usually more widely set on the skull. So now, let's go back and take a look at our skull. Do you think its eyes are more forward-facing or more widely set on the skull? So based on the evidence, looking at both this animal's teeth and the eye placement on its skull, do you think this animal was a predator or a prey? What did this animal eat? So in looking at the teeth and the placement of the eyes on this skull, we can tell that this animal was an herbivore. Another interesting thing about the placement of the eyes on this skull is you can notice that they're actually placed quite high on the skull. If we compare that with the eyes and the eye placement on the rabbit skull that we looked at earlier, we can see that the eyes for the rabbit are pretty much in the middle of the skull. However, the eyes on this animal are set closer to the top. Let's think. Why would a prey species like this animal here want its eyes placed high on the skull? I'll give you a hint. This animal spends a lot of time in the water. If you guessed this animal is a beaver, then you're spot on. Beavers spend a lot of their time in the water, and in order to avoid their predators, they'll leave just the tip of their nose and their eyes out of the water to scan around and make sure that things are safe. So now that we've looked at an herbivore skull, let's take a look at another skull for comparison. So this is our next skull. Let's take a close look. How is it different from the beaver skull we just examined? What teeth are most prominent in this mouth? These teeth. These are the teeth that gave our ancestors nightmares. They inspired tales of monsters and everything that goes bump in the night. These are the canines. They are used for stabbing and holding on to food. They're also used for slicing and getting food into the mouth. You'll also notice the incisors are still here, but they're much smaller and not used nearly as much for chewing as they were in the beaver skull. If we open it up and look at the molars, you'll notice these teeth are much narrower and sharper than that of the beaver, not nearly used for grinding. When the mouth closes, you can notice that these two teeth act like scissors. They slice and cut food. This skull is obviously a carnivore. Now that we've examined a small number of very sharp teeth, let's look at the eyes. What do you notice about the placement of the eyes? Are they more forward-facing? How big are they? We've already discussed how the placement of the eyes affects vision and can help you determine the likely habits of an animal. We'll notice that these are very forward-facing. So this is indeed a predator. Now let's talk about size. When a structure is large, it often means it gets more use. It takes up a larger proportion of the area of the brain and also has a larger space in the skull to allow more sensory organs for that structure. Remember what the 5 senses are and think about how we experience those senses. Let's compare this skull to another somewhat similar animal. Take a look at these two skulls. What is similar? What's different? What is the dominant sensory structure for each of these animals? In this skull, the eyes are most prominent. They're the largest feature on the skull. It has a very short nose, which doesn't have a lot of room for sensing scent. This tells us this animal is a visual predator. It uses its eyes to locate its prey. We can also look at these structures here, the auditory bulli, which are structures which house the sensory organs of the ears. While not as large as the eyes, they are somewhat enlarged when compared to other animals. Let's take a look at this other skull. Note that the auditory bulli are quite a bit smaller. In this skull, we notice that the nose is significantly longer than in the first skull. Scent is the primary sensory organ in this skull. This animal uses scent first, and then once it gets close to its prey, uses its eyes, which are still somewhat enlarged, to chase down its prey. Let's look at some of the other interesting features on this skull. One of the things you might notice is just the general shape. Compared to other animals, the skull of this animal is longer and flatter, as it likes to spend most of its time in tight spaces, and its ancestors and relatives spend a lot of time in underground burrows. Therefore, these animals have evolved a tube-like shape, which allows them to move through underground and above-ground holes very quickly and efficiently. This skull also shows a very prominent ridge that you'll notice here at the top of the skull. This is known as the sagittal crest. Remember, one of the functions of bones is for muscle attachment. Once again, a structure that is larger in proportion to other bones means it gets a lot of use. What are the functions of the muscles on the head of an animal? Move your face around and think about it from the point of view of a predator. The sagittal crest is the point of attachment for the temporalis muscle, which controls the opening and closing of the jaw. Therefore, this animal has a very large temporalis muscle in proportion to its skull and has a big bite. Chomp. Herbivores, in contrast, have a small temporalis muscle and a larger masseter, which controls the side-to-side motion of the jaw used in chewing and grinding. So, can you guess what predators these are? Remember, they're all native to New York State and Black Rock Forest. This skull is that of a bobcat, and this one is a male fisher. Now let's look at a third type of skull. And if you remember your dietary terms, you can probably figure out what this one is by the process of elimination. Let's start by looking at the teeth like we did with the other skulls. How do the teeth of this skull compare to the other ones we've looked at today? We've got a lot of sharp teeth, like the canines and incisors that we saw in the bobcat. However, the molars are unlike that of the beaver or the bobcat. They're wide, like the beaver. However, they're also sharp, like the bobcat. That's because these teeth are good for eating both meat and plants. Now let's take a look at the eyes. They're fairly forward-facing, giving this animal really good depth perception. And if we look at the nose, it's probably the most prominent feature on this skull. So this animal uses largely scent to find its food, but also uses its eyes. And then if we look at the sheer size of this skull, we can tell that this was a large animal, very intimidating to any other animal that it comes across. This is the skull of the omnivorous American black bear. Well, we've been on a journey today, and I hope you were able to learn a little something about the characteristics of mammals and some of the features of their skulls. And if you enjoyed looking through this Black Rock Forest collection, check out our other video on the adaptations of mammal hair. Prey species, on the other hand, don't need to
Three, two, one. What's going on over there? You ghost.
So they need less binocular vision and a wider field of view. The more space there is of this overlap, and the more binocular vision you have. However, this also narrows your field of view. Spray species?
Yeah, that's real.
So this animal here, this is a beaver. It spends a lot of time in its water. In its water? Really?
He owns it.
I mean, in a way.